Unscripted disclaimer. This video was originally intended as a deep dive on the Dark Age, taking a sort of objective look at the era and the products and seeing what it was that made it tick and why it pissed so many people off. But no matter how many times I reworked and redid this script, it would always devolve into a rant about how much I hate it. I was going to just can the whole project until I remembered that you guys seem to like it when I rant about stuff that I don't like, so fuck it. Here it is. I hope you enjoy. Hello, fellow mech warriors, Mage Leader here. You know, BattleTech has been around for a while. It never ceases to amaze me how many of my favorite things came from before my time. Before I was even an itch in Papa Mage's PPC, it seems like the world has already peaked. The 1980s saw the birth of nearly everything that I currently enjoy. Nintendo, Transformers, Macross, Terminator, RoboCop. Hell, even the episodes of Thomas the Tank Engine I grew up watching came from this decade. My favorite musicians were either on top of the world or in their twilight years, and most of what would eventually become my favorite songs were written around this time. And of course, who could forget that all-important bastion of all things badass, Battle Droids. Sorry. I mean BattleTech. Released in 1984, BattleTech was a smash hit. It may be hard to believe nowadays, but there was a time when BattleTech was the tabletop franchise, the envy of gaming companies around the globe. This space opera of giant robots and the dweebs who drive them had it all: an in-depth lore to enjoy, a line of novels, some of which were even readable, video games, a collectible trading card game, comic book, okay, maybe not comic books, and an animated cartoon series featuring groundbreaking computer-generated visuals. The franchise even boasted its own dedicated arcades built around simulator pods, putting players directly at the controls of their favorite machines. BattleTech was on top of the world. But we're not here today to reminisce about the good old days. No, if you're a regular viewer of my channel, then you probably already know about the good stuff. Today, I'm here to take a closer look at what went wrong. How exactly does a franchise go from the biggest name in tabletop to a virtual unknown? Well, the technical answer has to do with lawsuits and porch building projects. Allegedly! But the brand still has a good amount of popularity up until FAS's collapse. The IP would pass on to WizKids, and what they would do with it next would be one of the single most controversial moves in the history of tabletop. In most BattleTech circles, the ones worth actually being part of anyway, the term Dark Age is often spoken with an air of disgust. It is a sinister phrase that cannot be spoken without a strong compulsion to vomit. The mere sight of the logo was enough to drive some BattleTech fans to utter madness. It is the black sheep, the thing we don't talk about, like the small goblin family that your dad keeps imprisoned in the attic for undisclosed reasons. Asking about it will often result in vague responses. It jumped the shark. It was a hard reset. It was a failed attempt at rebranding that flopped so hard that WizKids had to make a whole new prequel era just to shoehorn it into the canon. Yes, the Dark Age is all of these things, but what is it really? Is it actually as bad as everyone says? Yes. But I don't just want to say that and move on. I want to take a slightly closer look at the Dark Age, the era so reviled that it sent the franchise into a dark age of its own. Let's dive in and briefly analyze this weird chapter of history and try to figure out what in the actual fuck happened. Before I move on, I should probably point out that Dark Age has its fans. I would also like to point out that plenty of other horrible things have fans, like Hawaiian pizza, Disney Star Wars, and communism. Suffice to say that I will not be catering to Dark Age fans today. All 5 of them, that is. If you like Dark Age, good for you. It must be nice living without the gift of good taste to ruin your brainless fun. The Dark Age exists as an attempt to reset and rebrand the BattleTech IP for WizKids, a sensible move from a business perspective. After all, FASA had been making BattleTech products for decades before the collapse and had a long line of products readily available on the secondary market. WizKids wanted to make the brand their own and hold exclusive ownership of the products, and so they launched MechWarrior Dark Age as an alternative game system using their Click system. But WizKids knew that the game alone wasn't what drove BattleTech. Books and lore were equally lucrative potential markets, and so a similar reset was planned for the lore. FASA's old work wouldn't do. They needed a new era that they, and only they, could control and make money off of. They decided to wipe the slate clean, and what they came up with was certainly something. August 7th, 3132. The inner sphere is rocked to its core by an event known as Grey Monday. Across nearly all of civilized space, the HPG network begins to go offline. Hyperpulse generators fry their cores, rendering communication across the light years impossible. At the same time, HPG stations are attacked by mysterious armed forces, clashing with other unknown entities in a bid for control over the stations, resulting in even more extensive damage. When the smoke clears, 80% of the HPGs are rendered useless and unfixable. The inner sphere plunges into chaos as virtually every aspect of modern life collapses. Banking is deleted, governments are rendered ineffective overnight, and militaries lose their ability to coordinate. Interstellar trade evaporates, the great houses are hit hard, with only the clans and some of the deep periphery escaping damage. Everything plunges into chaos. Also, BattleMech stopped being a thing, I guess. It's a bit murky. This total collapse is the setup for the Dark Age, and I know some of you are rushing down to the comments section to tell me about the details I'm leaving out, but here's the thing, I'm not leaving anything out. This is Dark Age as it was originally presented. The rest of the lore was written after the fact in a limp-dicked attempt to force it all to make sense. WizKids wasn't originally concerned with such things. They wanted to hit the reset button, and so that's exactly what they did. Was there a thing in BattleTech that you liked? Well, too bad, fucko, it's been deleted. You'll buy our new shit and like it. This is what is known in professional circles as getting off on the wrong foot, or in layman's terms, doing a massive fuck-up. With BattleTech's popularity having been on the decline ever since the clan invasion, and even more so during the ensuing Fedcom civil war, WizKids managed to piss off the few fans that remained in a bid to gather new ones. It wasn't enough to simply introduce a new game system that required the purchase of new minis. No, they went that extra mile by forcing players to abandon their favorite units, factions, and lore in one fell swoop. To play the current era of BattleTech, you had to start over completely. Needless to say, this went over about as well as an LAM with jammed actuators, but that wasn't the only problem. You see, the reset button didn't just hit the Inner Sphere's story, but also its tech tree. With interstellar trade now at a crawl, BattleMech production nearly disappeared, and so mechs became a rare and valuable commodity. I guess. Apparently WizKids forgot that they exist in the tens of millions and that salvage and repair has been the Inner Sphere's MO for literal centuries, but this time apparently they're so rare that we have to resort to shit like this. And we'll get to that. Yeah, one of the big things that sets Dark Age apart was the setting moving away from its simple, more grounded arsenal of battle mechs and armored vehicles. Now it's all about the mech substitutes, baby. Did you like the Warhammer, the Battlemaster, the Griffin? Sorry, how about a walking excavator instead? Are mechs and battle armor just a little bit too cool for you? Have a proto-mech. It's basically just battle armor, but about 20% bigger and with capabilities straight out of an anime because we don't have the resources to build battle mechs anymore, but new technology that not even the Hell Memory Core could provide? That's A-okay. Here's a giant weaponized tripod because fuck you and your intelligence. Dark Age was a place of no rules where anything goes, and the more you think about it, the more your brain hurts. Now look, I enjoy dumb fun as much as anybody. I don't always need an explanation for things. I've never once asked how the Transformers have females when they don't reproduce. I don't care how an Imperator Titan from 40k stands upright while being the size of Mount Olympus Mons, and it doesn't bother me that the G-forces of piloting a VF-1 Valkyrie would reduce the pilot to a fine pace, but I can only suspend my disbelief so far. You can't tell me that Indiana Jones is set in the 1930s and then give him a Star Trek phaser, and you can't tell me that society and trade have both collapsed and then have people jumping around in a suit ripped straight out of Armored Core for answer. But for all that drama, was the game itself any good? Honestly, yeah, kinda. The click system has always been solid, and Dark Age is no exception, but many players found that it lacked a lot of what classic BattleTech had to offer. Like it or not, it's a very different game, and really that's emblematic of Dark Age as a whole. It's different. This is what a lot of defenders latch onto, saying that we only hate the game because it isn't exactly like classic BattleTech, to which I say,
yeah.
There's a bit more to it, though. It's one thing to be different, it's another to share little to no DNA with the original. BattleTech is, at its core, a hard sci-fi universe, and its gameplay has focused on simulation. We don't carry around an entire legal document's worth of hit tables for nothing. Dark Age is, well, not that. Dark Age puts a big focus on weird and wacky sci-fi tech and doesn't seem to give much of a shit about explaining itself. The absolute slew of bullshit technology from this setting is outrageous, and the art direction is all over the place. I'll be the first to admit that a lot of this stuff does look pretty cool, but then there's also things like the tortoise too. And even the things that look cool don't feel very BattleTech. Perhaps in its own universe, it would be some of the best stuff ever designed, but outside of a few exceptions, it just doesn't fit. It's like bringing a toy X-Wing to a historic aircraft exhibition. Yeah, it's cool and all, but you're kind of missing the point. And these aren't a few scattered examples either. Dark Age is loaded with this kind of thing. It introduced so much ill-fitting content that players to this day can't keep track of it all. So, let's take a step back and recap. The circumstances of Dark Age's creation are unfortunate, the lore is dubious, the game system is solid but different, and the new content is, with a few exceptions, entirely unlike what fans liked about BattleTech to begin with. It was a black hole for the franchise, and it didn't perform well. Attempts would be made to work it more gracefully into the canon with the Jihad, but that era has its own slew of problems. This was the turning point for a lot of BattleTech's faithful. The Dark Age had done irreparable damage to the lore, and all future conflicts had to tiptoe around its bloated corpse. Despite fan pleas to cut it out of canon entirely and give the setting a fresh start, Catalyst Game Labs, the company who held the BattleTech license after the smoke cleared, has stubbornly clung onto this tumorous growth ever since. It's worth noting that a lot of the old guard of BattleTech work at Catalyst now, with one notable exception as of a few years ago, and so their work isn't easily discounted or ignored. As an author myself, I understand the desire to make your story work without a reset, but no matter how hard CGL attempts to reassemble the Ming vase that is BattleTech, the more they simply shatter the remaining pieces. Clan is an absolute mess, and a lot of it is tied to the HPG blackout and its implications. The writers have often used it as a crutch for lazy storytelling, both using and forgetting about it whenever it's convenient, and I'm not just talking out of my ass here, they've outright admitted it. Because of this, it's impossible to create anything of quality. The Dark Age so fundamentally undermined the foundation of BattleTech that you can't just return to the status quo. Without HPGs, the great houses can't effectively govern their territories, large armies can't be coordinated, galactic-scale military campaigns become impractical if not outright impossible. All that remains to write about are brush conflicts. Anything larger leads to immense levels of bullshit, which is how Clan Wolf has ended up taking Terra. This is why the Dark Age is such a hated era. It is many things. A reminder of when the franchise was on death's door, a callback to a product line that didn't fit the hobby, and a massive middle finger to both the franchise and its fans so big and bold that it's still fucking it up to this day. And look, I love the MechAssault games as much as the next guy, but I would love them so much more if they weren't tethered to this godforsaken trash heap. I've only touched on the surface of what Dark Age is here. This monstrosity stuck around well beyond its expiration date, and there's so much stuff that you can dive into on your own. I haven't even touched the Jihad, Devlin Stone, or the Republic of the Sphere, all of which carry Dark Age DNA. It is a massive can of awfulness that I could spend entire decades analyzing, and life is far too short for that kind of wasted energy. I already know far more about the Dark Age than anyone needs to. Feel free to dive deep on your own time, but me? I'm satisfied with providing a brief explanation. This video was originally planned as a much more thorough analysis, but after a month of digging through this slop, I felt the last of my brain cells starting to mix up a batch of cyanide flavor aid, so I decided to cut it short. So yeah, that's the end result of my labors. I spent tons of time trying to put this together, and all I got at the end was this disorganized rant. This is what Dark Age does to us. I hope I at least managed to provide a tiny bit of context as to the culture of vitriol that surrounds this mistake of an era. For those wanting more, I'm sure that the comment section will be full of helpful individuals who will gladly share their own experiences with Dark Age, both positive and negative. And if for some reason this whole era looks cool and interesting to you, then go fuck yourself. If it looks cool and interesting to you, then maybe you can find something to love about it. Anyway, that's about all I can stand. If you'll excuse me, I'm going to go and play some MechWarrior 5 to restore some of my sanity. Until next time, this is Mage Leader, signing off. Son of a...